Back in 1975, an engineer working inside the most powerful photography company on Earth invented the first portable digital camera. But 37 years later, that very same company was forced to file for bankruptcy because of the digital camera. By the mid-1970s, Kodak held a near monopoly on American photography. They controlled exactly 90% of the domestic film market, pulling in over $6 billion in annual revenue. Their empire ran on a highly refined version of the razor and blade strategy. Kodak sold the cameras themselves at a low cost, sometimes barely breaking even, because the physical camera was just a hook to lock consumers into a lifelong cycle of buying film, paper, and processing chemicals. To understand why that strategy was so powerful, look at this bar chart comparing profit margins. While 20% is considered a very healthy margin in standard manufacturing, Kodak's film and chemical consumables carried margins as high as 80%. That level of profitability created a highly rigid internal structure. When an industrial machine generates billions in near-guaranteed recurring revenue, any alternative business model looks like a financial downgrade by comparison. In the summer of 1973, Kodak hired a 24-year-old electrical engineer named Stephen Sasson. By 1975, Sasson was experimenting with a newly developed charged-coupled device, or CCD sensor, to see if it could capture light as an electronic signal rather than a chemical reaction. After 2 years of work, Sasson assembled this, the world's first portable digital camera. It was an 8-pound jury-rigged box powered by 16 nickel-cadmium batteries and held together by half a dozen custom circuit boards. The technical specifications matched the rough exterior. It took 23 seconds to record a single 0.01 megapixel black and white image onto a standard cassette tape. The image quality was objectively terrible. But the device functioned. It successfully proved that a photographer could capture and store an image without ever needing a single millimeter of film. When Sasson demonstrated his prototype to Kodak's executives, their reaction was entirely dismissive. Management's official response to the invention of digital photography was, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." The executives recognized exactly what they were looking at. If a filmless camera ever reached the mass market, it would instantly cannibalize their $10 billion high-margin chemical ecosystem. We can see their reasoning mapped out in this diagram. For a digital camera to be genuinely useful, it requires an entire surrounding ecosystem. In 1975, personal computers did not exist. There was no practical digital storage and no internet to share files across. The central device was completely isolated. Shelving Sasson's prototype was a strictly logical financial decision. Pouring billions of dollars into an unproven, ecosystem-dependent electronics project, one designed specifically to destroy their most profitable asset, ran counter to every corporate incentive they had. 14 years later, the technology had advanced. By 1989, Sasson and his team had built a fully functional digital SLR camera that recorded images to memory cards. But Kodak's marketing department explicitly refused to sell it, fearing it would cut into consumer film revenue. In 1991, Kodak released the DCS-100. It weighed 13 pounds and required a heavy tethered storage unit. Priced at $25,000, it was restricted entirely to professional photojournalists, carefully avoiding direct competition with mass-market film. Instead of embracing the new digital hardware, they spent $500 million in 1996 developing the Advantix system. It offered digital previews on the camera screen, but still required users to shoot and process physical film. Advantix was a complete commercial failure. By treating digital imaging as a threat to be managed rather than a market to capture, Kodak left the consumer segment wide open for pure electronics companies like Sony and Canon. This line graph tracks the industry's fatal inflection point. Kodak's film sales peaked in 2001. Just 1 year later, the lines cross. Digital camera sales permanently overtook film cameras. The collapse was incredibly fast. Between 2002 and 2006, film revenue dropped by 60%. To stay afloat, they were forced into the digital market they had spent decades avoiding. But without the massive margins of chemical film, the math didn't work. By 2001, Kodak was losing $60 on every digital camera they managed to sell. The razor and blades model was broken. Kodak found itself trapped in a highly competitive, low-margin hardware war it was never structured to win. On January 19, 2012, Eastman Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, weighed down by $6.8 billion in liabilities. In a desperate bid to survive the proceedings, the company put over 1,100 of its foundational digital imaging patents up for sale. Kodak's immense success in the 20th century created a level of corporate inertia that prioritized protecting its existing profit engine over adapting to its replacement. They were perfectly engineered to dominate a world that was rapidly disappearing. Nearly every digital camera and smartphone manufacturer today relies on the foundational sensor architecture that Steven Sasson and his colleagues developed in the 1970s. Because Kodak secured those patents early on, hardware giants like Canon, Sony, and Nikon had to pay Kodak billions of dollars in licensing fees just to keep their products on the shelves. This created a final, bitter irony. The company that pioneered digital photography spent its final decades as a patent licensing firm, earning more from the success of its competitors than it ever could from its own cameras.